combining in certain ways to form molecules, and combining in certain ways to form larger molecules, and ultimately culminating in sentient beings who can think, be self-aware, and I would say even be God-aware. That's our challenge. So my challenge as a biologist really encompasses all three of these. As a Christian biologist particularly, I'm going to also talk about this. Now, I understand in a secular university you're limited in being able to talk about these things. So in that sense, I count it as sort of a blessing to have been able to teach at a Christian college all these years. And so I appreciate that. But that's our challenge. As you can imagine, this is not a simple thing. In my general biology class, I tell the students life is very complex. And yet it's kind of interesting. The perception I want to leave with my biology class is that life is both bigger and smaller. Milky Way galaxy, 100 billion stars. And the astronomers tell us there are 100 billion galaxies, each containing about 100 billion stars. Bigger and smaller. An enzyme, a virus. Submicroscopic things, you can barely resolve them with an electron microscope. Things are faster, bigger, smaller, faster. An enzyme can literally grab hold of a substrate very specifically, twist it, release it in pieces, and then open up and repeat the process all over again 160,000 times a second. Faster and slower. The average, according to the geologists, I'm not an expert in that area, the geologists tell us the average speciation event in the fossil record is about 160,000 years. Faster, slower. Life is also amazingly simple and elementary. Think about it. With adenine, guanine, cytosine, and thymine, 4 chemical bases, every life form that has ever existed on the planet has been derived. Simple mathematics, just 4 of them. But, as we'll see a little bit later, combining them in different combinations gives rise to amazing biological life-giving creations, all the way from a herpes virus, to a honeybee, to a horse, to a human. It's all the same. All life comes from just 4 chemical molecules. So the imagery then here is this idea that life is connected all together in a multivariable equation, integrated both horizontally, but also vertically, layer upon layer upon layer, and all connected. That's the challenge that we have in biology education. Some of the things we need for higher order thinking, just quickly. It requires openness and receptiveness to new dots. Have you ever met anyone who said, I have all the information I need, no thanks? What does that say? It says that our learning stops right there. Acquisition, openness to acquisition, and a commitment to acquisition of new dots. The dots must be accurate and well defined. In biology, we understand that sometimes whole different directions will take place whether an enzyme has a phosphate or doesn't have a phosphate. Got to be precisely defined. And finally, our brains, in order to think these things and put them together, need processing time. Now, this is just a physical thing. I mean, I won't spend time with it, but some of you who know neurobiology know that in order for a memory to stick, there actually has to be a physical connection with other neurons. Actual physical connection. And then there's a memory. And so it takes time for these connections to take place. I know that I've done this. I've had a problem that my brain is working on in the subconscious, and I might have a dream. And in my dream, it occurs to me. Or you're walking down the road sometime, you've been thinking about a problem 2 weeks ago, and then all of a sudden the answer just comes to you. This is the subconscious level, the plasticity of the neuronal circuits, attempting to make those connections for us all the time. But the crucial issue is that we've got to make sure that the dots are present, because the brain can't connect anything that's not there. Okay. So there are some barriers to higher order thinking. First, limiting input of new dots. Misunderstanding dots. We're going to talk about that some more here in just a moment. It's important that we understand what we're talking about very clearly. Focusing on the wrong dots. walking down a pathway we think is right or think is correct, but it's maybe not quite right. When we realize it's not right, what should we do? C.S. Lewis, in his book Mere Christianity, I think that's where it was, he described this. He said, when you find yourself on the wrong path, you know, human nature is sort of like, I don't want to admit I'm on the wrong path, so let me see if I can find, maybe this is just a male thing, I don't know. Find my directions, maybe I'll try this way, and try to get back on path. He said, when you find yourself on the wrong path, sometimes the best thing to do is to just go back to the point of divergence. Get back on the right track, and then begin to move forward. This last one is one I consider to be one of the most important ones that we'll talk about here today. This whole creation-evolution issue, or science, faith, biology, Bible conflict, I think ultimately boils down to problems primarily. You know, it's a multivariable thing too, but primarily right here. So when we talk about language and communication, and remembering these things I've talked about up here, it's important to understand that the words that we define in our brains as educators, then we try to communicate to our students, we may not successfully communicate the content as we see it and understand it to the listener. For example, if I want to understand a concept, it's easy for me to work it through my brain because all the dots that I have there, I put there. And as I put them there, I identify the balances and the connections and the understandings that should be associated with those dots. So it's easy for me to put them together. The problem then, however, is this transference as educators, and I mean that not just in terms of a college setting, but communicating to the general culture about this topic in particular. It's important that we use language that can effectively transfer the concepts from here to the culture. And that's no small thing. Lots of misunderstandings. So we have a language problem as it relates to the science-religion thing. And I like to say sometimes that it's sort of like a modern-day Tower of Babel. A couple of issues. One is the definitions of terms. But another thing is this distinctly appears unique human thing to want to attach emotional content to words. And so when we look at these things, if I use the word science, I can be pretty sure that if I use the word science and I say that to my colleague in the art department, our understanding of science is different. If I say it to a sociology student, their understanding of science is fear. We all have these different things that we attach to these words. Sharon Begley is a writer, used to be a writer for the Wall Street Journal, and she wrote an article once where she's actually written a book now on neurobiology and some of the research that's being done there. But an interesting experiment that they did one day, wired up these human subjects, and they then presented them with questions that would be resolved by intellectual, logical processing, and other questions that would be addressed in terms of the emotional centers of the brain. And so they thought that they would always, when they would introduce the topic to the experiment, the subject of the experiment, in some cases they would attach a negative emotion to that. And then when they later raise that issue, but raise it in the context of a question that would need to be processed intellectually and logically in the rational centers of the brain, if there had been this emotional connection to it, guess what happened? The emotional centers of the brain, in her words, lit up like Vegas, and the rational centers were silent. And so when we talk about these things that have emotional attachments to them, we just need to recognize that people can't help it. If they've been taught to fear science, or if they've been taught to fear evolution, or if they've taught to fear something else, when they hear that word, those brain circuits are going to fire. And they will trump rational thinking, hopefully for only a time. Okay. So here are some other words that fall into that category. Evolution, creationist. I'm a creationist in the sense that I believe that there is a God who is the creator, but I certainly don't want to have the other attachment of creationists that some people have, just my personal view. And so, we have different meanings attached to certain words. Even the word Christian. I don't think I have this here. Yeah, I do. Even the word Christian. Last summer, I taught at an offshore medical school.